right, you ready for this? Here we go. Day 2, books, 5 days, 5 people, 5 books a day. We're going to get in there. Yesterday, church history, I bored a lot of you. Today, we're going to come into apologetics. So apologetics, from the old classic apologia, of finding a way to defend one's faith. Famously back in the day, for example, the earliest apologists are the apostles. They are the people we find in Scripture. Paul and John, for example, in their letters, they're writing to people who already misunderstand the faith, who already are trying to create something from nothing or distort things that they're seeing in the pieces of Scripture that they had. And so these people who had been given the full part are saying, no, that's not who Jesus was, or yes, Jesus was a real person. Or so you see these pieces. My favorite is John, when he writes in his letters, and he says, and this guy, I'll take care of him when I get back, who's spouting all this craziness. Anyway, when you come to like general Christian apologetics over time, one of my favorites is C.S. Lewis. I was looking for I couldn't find it. I must have lent it out. But C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity is one of the classic, if you're looking for a book to reintroduce or introduce Christianity, it's a nice start to do that. The other book that I couldn't find for some reason, if you want a Catholic side, a colleague of C.S. Lewis and at that point was G.K. Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton wrote one called Orthodoxy. And Orthodoxy is a nice reintroduction to Catholicism in truth and objective truth and orthodoxy or right belief. So I encourage you in those two in general. But today what I have for you as well, number 1, the Catholic controversy or controversies. So this is from St. Francis de Sales. And St. Francis de Sales is sent, long story short, into a southern part of France to begin to re-evangelize. And then he eventually is made Bishop of Bishop of Geneva. But he wasn't allowed in there. The Calvinists would have killed him if he'd have gone in there. So he had to live in exile. And so he began to evangelize in the area in France where he was. Now, the people there had also stepped away from the faith. And so this is in the era of the 16th century, late 16th century, where he's there. And so he begins to write pamphlets and put it under people's doors, since they wouldn't talk to him. They're afraid to talk to him. And so over time, people began to read the questions he was asking, making people think, and more doors began to open. And they say that by the end of his time, some say that the estimates are up to 70,000 people who had left the faith that were in this region had come back to their mother faith. And so all of these pamphlets were gathered together and placed into a compilation, the Catholic Controversy or Catholic Controversies. So highly encourage this. The same questions that we ask, okay, why do we believe this or that? Comparison between Protestants, Catholics. 500 years ago, he already answered them all. So it's a good resource. There's a new translation out now that's bigger book, bigger type, which is nice. If you want something a little slightly newer, Hilaire Belloc, this man minces no words. Pretty funny to read. Nice thin book as well, but he chooses 5 heresies, deviations from the faith, and he begins to talk about them and see how they've developed over time and what they mean for us now. Very entertaining, very informative. Now, here more recently, we have a lot of famous apologists who have been around, and sometimes they will pick just one book that's in general, so that covers all kinds of apologetic pieces. So, for example, Karl Keating's Catholicism and Fundamentalism was an older one, and he's very boom, 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 boom as well in your face. Evangelical is not enough, Worthy is the Lamb, all kinds of general books that cover everything all at once. Beyond that, you also have, for example, a famous apologist and convert to the Catholic faith is Scott Hahn. Now, Scott Hahn writes books where he chooses particular things. So, for example, Catholic for a Reason is one of his series, and he'll choose like Scripture, and this one you'll see Mystery of the Mother of God. Or in version 3, Scripture and the Mystery of the Mass. So you can do apologetics and see these questions and answers that are more specific. Moving on. Or just one topic. Sometimes you'll find one particular topic that somebody will write on, and it can be very informative. Here's one example. Mark Shea, another famous apologist, he focuses on tradition and authority. And so he asks questions around, well, by what authority do people change the things that Jesus has come and established? And so he goes through those questions. Also a very good way of looking into apologetics. So you can Google a particular topic in apologetics and Catholic and see the different books that come online. My last piece for you is a little more, I don't know how you'll think about it, but once you've got a good base here in apologetics, general defending of the faith, it's not really a diving deep, that's later. We'll go into that in Catechetic Day. But you may begin to read a way, for example, to dialogue. So sometimes you have to be able to speak the same language. So if I'm dialoguing with a Mormon, then I'll go through and I'll say, what does the Book of Mormon say? And I'll go through and read it and see. So when I was in El Salvador, I would sit in a hammock and I would read things I could get my hands on. So for example, was in a dialogue with a Mormon, so I read the Book of Mormon. And you can say, okay, well, what is this? Where are they coming from? What does this mean? Why does this sound just like the New Testament with names changed or different things like that? So you can go through and read it and say, okay, now let's begin to have a dialogue, and you can reference some of the things that they're talking about. It makes it helpful in defending yourself as well. Or even the Quran, you can see on my notes. The Quran, the same thing. I was in a hammock kind of reading through the different surahs and saying, okay, why do they believe this? Where does this come from? Their reverence for Mary, blah, blah, blah. You can go through and begin to read and see, okay, where does this come from? So these are ways that you can even further your apologetics, is by also knowing where people are coming from, where they get it from, and then read it and get a sense and context of where this might have come from. So start in the beginning, come through the scriptures. You can see through yesterday, we talked about church history, seeing all those pieces and how they reacted to changes in the faith and how they began to describe and answer questions. Or you can come into the Reformation era to these same questions who were asked at St. Francis de Sales, or into our time nowadays where it's breaking into sectors. So all of these are good options for you in the coming days. All right, that's your apologetics rundown. Hope that was helpful for you. And tomorrow we will enter into our next theme, which we'll keep you in suspense for. See you tomorrow at 5.